Hello Summoners and welcome back to another ProGuides video. My name is Nathan Ing and I'm here with the 12.5 mid-patch update. We'll provide updated tier lists for all 5 roles and follow up on balance changes from the patch. Make sure you hit the sub button so you don't miss out on future content like this. Now, let's get started. First up, we'll be starting off with our top laners. Soraka is a new addition to our top lane tier list. With how good she's doing, she deserves no less than an S tier. There's even an argument for her being put all the way up in the OP tier. While the sample size is small, she's close to a 56% win rate in Plat plus Elo so far this patch. Even with the relatively small amount of games to go off of, that's a pretty impressive stat. Soraka top isn't just some off-meta pick that just wins some cheesy strat or surprising gimmick. She's actually just an objectively good pick all around. She may not hit super hard, but her Q has a low cooldown, and each hit returns some HP to her, so she's great at winning the war of attrition in the top lane. Also, landing a Q slows your opponent while he's speeding you up, allowing you to count your foes. But just having a good laning phase obviously isn't enough to make a champion S tier. Soraka's real strength is in her scaling. Out of all the champions in the game, she's one of the most absolute best in team fights. That's a pretty bold statement, being that she doesn't bring any real CC or buffs to the table like most other supports, but her healing is just that OP. Even with healing reduction on the enemy team, you're adding thousands of extra HP to your team's combined health pool. Next up we have Zac, who are now moving up to the S tier. We placed him in the A tier in the start of the patch, but he's performing just way too well to not belong here with the other hard carries of solo queue. Zac's success comes from a few different things. For one, despite being a tank, he has really high sustained damage. He's almost more like a juggernaut in that regard. His base damages alone are good, but you can double down on that by itemizing aggressively with options like Sunfire Aegis, Demonic Embrace, and Thornmail. His laning phase is pretty solid, with most matchups either being winning or neutral, but he really does best in skirmishes and teamfights. The combination of high damage and a lot of disruption is just too much for a team without big amounts of peel to deal with. Shen is also getting a promotion to the A tier, with certain bruisers being stronger than ever thanks to their more offensive itemization options. Having a hard counter to them means a lot. Thankfully, Shen is built to do exactly that. Kinda like Zac, Shen is another champion that is labeled as a tank but plays more like a carry in most ways. Between the big damage that he gets from his Q and the ability to neutralize a lot of your opponent's ability to trade back with his W, Shen is designed to put bruisers in the dumpster. And speaking of trash, I stream on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 6 to 9 p.m. PST on twitch.tv/Nathan_ing. A little shameless self-plug there if you guys want to check me out. Anyway, out of lane, you'll keep up that not-so-tank style of playing by putting yourself in a side lane. Again, ignore the fact that Shen is considered a tank. He is not a frontliner. If you try to group up 5v5 and play that role, you'll just end up being kited, since your only form of engage is a very telegraphed short-range dash. Instead, keep split pushing to force someone to answer you, and then ult to a fight if you need to. If no one responds to your split push, then you get a turret. If they do, you get a fight with the numbers advantage. It's a win-win situation. Karma gets added to the tier list, and she lands in the A tier. She's a really solid lane bully, able to neutralize even the strongest of bullies. She does provide good utility in team fights, but she falls off a lot harder than other enchanters. For that reason, she can't quite make it into the S tier. No matter how ahead she is, she's always pretty useful, but never impressive in teamfights. Neeko gets a promotion to the A tier. She was previously considered B tier, but I think she's a little bit too good for that. B tier champions are those that are just kind of meh, or are only good in specific matchups and scenarios. But Neeko is a pretty flexible pick. Like with most ranged champions, she has the edge in lane right from level 1 with her harass, but she's not nearly as susceptible to all-in attempts as most top laners. Between the brute from her E and the stealth plus the movement speed from her W, you have plenty of room to disengage and outplay your foe. But the most important reason that Neeko works as a top laner is her flexible itemization. She's one of the few champions that can straight up switch between full AD and AP builds. So when dealing with a squishy lane opponent, you can just go full AP as usual. But against a bruiser that may itemize Wits End or Maw, you can just go for Kraken Slayer or into other attack speed and on-hit items. Jax and Set are both getting demoted to the B tier on the grounds of them just being kinda mediocre at the moment. There have been times where both picks could straight up 1v9 most games, but at the moment, even with the lead, they're not very impactful. Lissandra gets added to the top lane pool as a B tier pick. She lands here just because she's not someone that you want every game, but when it is a good time to pick her, it's really good. Basically, you don't want to get stuck playing lists against a super mobile opponent that can constantly gap close on you, like Riven or Fiora. They can go in on you more often than you can have your W up, so you're pretty vulnerable. But against less mobile bruisers, ranged squishy champion top laners, or beefy juggernauts and tanks, Lissandra can safely lane and make it to teamfights, where she can really pop off. She gives insane damage over the course of teamfights thanks to her passive, while also serving as a sort of secondary engage. Now for the jungle, here's our list. Graves moves down a peg to the A tier. He's definitely still a viable carry, but he doesn't quite make the S tier cut anymore. The thing is, no matter how well you play Graves, he's more of a pick that punishes dumb mistakes and enemies than one that you can use to straight up force plays. I know there's a lot of common back and forth debate on whether relying on opponents making mistakes is a reliable strategy, and to me, it actually is. But when that's all the champion brings to the table, it can't just really be considered an S tier pick unless it's really overtuned, which Graves isn't at the moment, thank goodness. All that being said, there are still some instances where Graves can completely roll games. The enemy team lacks hard CC or engage, and is filled with squishies, he can pretty much one-shot their entire team. Amumu gets dropped down to the A tier. He's still a good pick if all you want to do is play for team fights, but as with Graves, that's just hoping that you don't lose to a more proactive player early on. That isn't to say that Amumu is totally useless early game. His clear is fast, and his ganks are actually decent if you can land his Qs. So if you path well, you can have at least a bit of an impact. But don't try to 1v1 the enemy jungle or fight any skirmishes. Amumu doesn't do very much damage at all in the early game, and you won't be winning many fights with even numbers. Now, all of that being said, that's just the early game. Once you get some items, he becomes a super strong engaged tank and can solo almost any AD champion in the game. But of course, your main goal is to use his huge AoE ultimate for winning fights and around objectives. Kiana moves down another notch, down to the C tier. That nerf she got hit her pretty hard in the jungle. As a mid laner, you have the luxury of taking multiple trades, so losing a bit of burst isn't nearly as bad. But in the jungle, you need all the damage that you can get, since duels and ganks are all about going all in. Kiana was already feast or famine before, but she's leaning towards famine much more often than not. Just compared to any other early game snowbally champions like Rek'Sai and Elise. They do just as much burst, but have tools to spam gank lanes and win 1v1 duels much easier. Ivern drops down to the B tier because he's just the epitome of a mediocre pick right now. Oftentimes, a champion's stats don't get the full story. Look at champions like Samira or Akali. They usually have negative win rates in solo queue, but that's just because they have a really high skill floor, so all the baddies bring down their stats. And by that logic, you guys must be playing Samira and Akali, because you guys, in my eyes, are baddies. Not like in the bad way, but you know, like, you're a baddie. But Ivern is on the opposite side of that coin. He's incredibly easy to use, and still struggles to be above a 50% win rate. It's just the definition of coin flipping. You're praying that your teammates are going to be able to carry the game, and if they do poorly, you sink with them. You're just there for the ride, one way or another. Now, here's our mid lane tier list. Soraka gets left onto the mid lane tier list as well, but she isn't quite as good here as she is in the top lane. The top lane champion pool has champions that are good at all-in extended fights, which Soraka does really well against with her Q. But in the mid lane, the pool is a little bit tougher. You're likely to either be against a ranged champion or mage that you won't be able to hit with your Q, or a melee champion that has some scary all-in burst combo. That isn't to say that you're gonna get rolled, but you have to play things a little bit more carefully, and you won't be bullying as many opponents. But remember, the main reason that you're picking Soraka anyway is to teamfight, so as long as you aren't downright feeding, you'll be fine. Vladimir gets dropped to the B tier simply because of how matchup dependent he is. In a lane against somebody that can hard bully you early, he feels borderline unplayable. But in a winning or at least survivable lane where you can safely make it to the mid game, he's an insanely strong scaling carry. Once you reach 3 items with him, you should be strong enough to carry most fights. Now, let's move things down to the bot lane. We've made the decision to move Zeri back up into the OP tier. Even with all the nerfs that she received, she's still an insanely broken pick. It's kinda crazy how good she is. So many people called her bad just because they hadn't figured her out yet. But even after several nerfs, I'd argue that she's one of the best, if not the best ADC in the game. The one thing I'd say about her is that she's really difficult to play. More than any other champion, you need to have some insanely good mechanics to play her. Other champions may have some hard to pull off combos, but nothing compares to the ridiculously high APM that you need to teamfight with Zeri's ultimate. Also, you don't want to go with the Trinity Force build every game anymore. It's still good, but when you really need big damage to carry, going for a crit does the job better. Sadly, we had to move Caitlyn, one of my favorite ADCs, down to the B tier. She was doing really well for a while, and was actually considered the best ADC in high elo, since she was so insanely dominant that she would guarantee a winning bot lane. But she's fallen off hard, and she just really isn't worth picking anymore. She has the same weaknesses that we use when explaining why Renekton is so bad at the moment. By design, Caitlyn is supposed to bully lane hard and build up a snowballing lead that keeps her way ahead of the other ADC. You then extend that lead to the rest of the map, taking objectives and keeping your team way ahead of the enemy. But the way that she is now, she struggles to win most lanes, and even when she does, the lead that she gets just isn't as impactful enough to allow her to carry the mid game. To finish things off, we have our supports. Miss Galask has been moved up to the OP tier. Even with the nerfs that she got on this patch, she's still way too good of a pick to be considered anything else. And this honestly is a surprise to nobody. She has one of those kits that just synergizes way too well with a variety of champions. Turns out, having attack speed steroid, movement speed increase, and revive function all in one ability is pretty strong. And then we have her ultimate. No other ultimate in the game can turn a fight quite like hers. It works well to follow up on your own team's engage or counter the enemy teams. All in all, she's probably the hardest support in the game to play right, but when you do it, you'll have more impact than anybody else on the battlefield. Finishing off our list, we have Trundle, who is moving down to the C tier. He was in the B tier since he could be considered a counterpick to most tank supports, but honestly, it's just not worth it. There are plenty of other counterpicks to tanks that provide way more utility. If you want a melee counter engager, there's Rel. Or you can just take an enchanter that specializes in bullying melee champions, like Janna or the aforementioned Renata. And that wraps up things for our 12.5 mid-patch update. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on where the champions fall in the tier list down in the comment section. Also, check out the description for a link to join our Discord community, and feel free to talk to me there as well. I'm sometimes active there. With the new year and the new season started, we're bound to have some great content coming up for you guys. Best of luck on Summoner's Rift, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.